Well, another very warm welcome back, all of my YouTube browsers and subscribers, and thanks to each and every one of you once again for taking the time to retune to my classic Dirt Bike TV channel. Now, we've just about time to squeeze this one last video clip in just before we head out to Kendal to cover the two-day CCM racing event hosted by the Westmoreland Motor Club. Okay, so coming up in this next video, we're going to take a look at a bike that was once again built by Terry Pickering, and this was another very nice machine that Terry put together from boxes of old spare parts. So without any further delay, let's just take a look at Terry's 1978 AJS Stormer Red Devil 250. Now, this is another quality machine from the Terry Pickering classic dirt bike collection, and this particular bike really started its life as just boxes of old parts before Terry then did a full refurbishment on each and every component before eventually constructing this very nice and very rare British made scrambler. Now, these AJS Red Devils were of course yet another model in the Stormer motocross range, and they had a completely brand new frame from the original bikes, and they also had longer forks fitted on the front end. Now, these Red Devils, or AJ Red Devils as they became to be known, were of course the brainchild of the late Fluff Brown, who of course purchased all of the bikes and their spare parts for these Stormer bikes when the ailing Norton Villiers Triumph Company went down the toilet in the early 1970s. Now, it's said that there were two different types of frame for these machines. One version had a single down tube that started at the headstock and then branched out into two smaller diameter tubes, which then cradled the motor and allowed of course the central exhaust port of the Villiers engine to pass through, although it appears that Terry's model here has the other design whereby two single down tubes then run all the way down from the headstock. Although, as you'd expect, these were still very light little bikes because of that small diameter tubular frame and that very compact Villiers two-stroke motor. And when the likes of factory riders like Andy Roberton, who rode these bikes back in the day, these were extremely quick and handled extremely well. But not only did the bike have a brand new frame, the actual swing arm on these Red Devils again was a completely brand new design from the standard Stormer motorcycle, which had those eccentric cams for chain adjustment. Now, these Villiers two-stroke motors were quite a good power plant and well suited for off-road use, and not only were they used in these AJS Stormers, but the Villiers Starmaker motor, which looks externally identical to this engine, were put to good use in road racing bikes, although that particular motor had the option of a 6-speed gearbox, and many of the other components in that engine were very different to these standard Stormer engines. Now, normally these AJS Stormer motors had a 4-speed gearbox that was bolted onto the rear of the engine's crankcases and then of course connected to the motor by way of a clutch and a conventional primary chain. But back in the day, these engines would have used an Amal concentric carburetor as a standard fitment, but because this is a Red Devil Stormer, it's fitted with this bigger Amal 2000 series of carburetors. Now, these more modern type Amals had a choke lever built in, and many riders say that if they were set up correctly, they were just as good and as efficient as any Japanese Mikuni equivalent. Now once again a relatively modern style plastic air filter box on our Red Devil, and many of the parts on these bikes were slightly different from your regular Stormers, because this was still effectively a brand new model of machine. Although between the Villiers motor and the gearbox and that big AML carburetor, this was still quite a tight and compact little unit housed inside a very light but strong steel tubular frame. Now these particular Red Devils basically still use the standard forks from the original AJS Stormer, although these were now titled the long travel variety, and Villiers then took upon themselves to add these extensions onto the bottom of each fork leg to increase the amount of suspension travel. Now although they don't look very pretty, these certainly gained the bike a few more valuable inches of travel, and they would go a long way to help the rider soak up those bumps when the tracks were rough. Although I have to admit it does look a bit makeshift in its design, but overall I think this had the desired effect. Now once again, these rear shocks, as you'd expect, are not original units from that early 1970s period, but are a modern interpretation of classic suspension units, and are really a pair of nitrogen gas filled shocks. But these Spanish made gas units will certainly be a decent upgrade to what would have been fitted back in the day, and with their dual rate springs they should be well suited to this particular little Red Devil. Now, as I said previously, because this bike had a completely different frame from the normal AJS Stormers, it also had a redesigned swing arm, and this time the frame designer Fluff Brown has not used the original eccentric cam adjusters that were normally fitted at the front of the swing arm, but has now gone for these more conventional style chain adjusters. Although again, these rear brake hubs are the very same ones as fitted to the original Stormer machines, and again these were very light and had quite decent stopping power for an older drum brake system, and of course coupled to these extremely light alloy wheels, this all helped towards reducing the weight and make this an almost feather-light motorcycle. Now of course an alloy fuel tank on this Fluff Brown Red Devil, and earlier AJS Stormers like the 370 and 410 from 1970 onwards used yellow fiberglass fuel cells, and the very early Stormers up to 1970 tended to use orange fiberglass tanks, although these later bikes more or less all used alloy fuel tanks in this pear-shaped design. And as I remember, the Fluff Brown Enduro Stormers had an alloy coffin shaped tank on that particular version, but these alloy tanks are certainly the better of all the styles, and as you can see, quite a slim fit inside this Red Devil chassis. Now once again, the bike's expansion exhaust chamber underwent a full restoration by Terry, and all of the old dings and dents were then removed from its many years of racing on the tracks, and as you can see, it looks like almost brand new once again. But this over the top of the engine was quite a good design for off-road racers, as it kept most of the pipe out of harm's way and out of the path of any flying rocks or other debris that could damage it. And there was quite a nice two-stroke ring-a-ding-ding crackle that came out of this tailpipe when that Villiers motor got fired up. Now they say that this Red Devil seat was reasonably comfortable for such a light little motorcycle, and for a 1970 machine it was quite a good place to rest your backside on between flying over the bumps or when you were making steep turns. Now, as far as I'm aware, Terry has taken the time to fit these period correct bars, grips and cables to his particular Red Devil, and the good quality Gunnar gasser has also been added to what would have been fitted to this bike back in the day. But of course all of these controls and their other associated parts go into keeping this quite rare little bike as it was from that 1970s era. Although when you consider that this bike was actually built from just boxes of old bike parts that Terry then refurbished to construct this particular Red Devil into what you see here, you have to admit that the final project has turned out pretty well. But until I came across this bike of Terry's, I never even knew that such a machine existed from AJS, because I've certainly never seen one on any racetrack here in the UK, so that'll maybe give you an idea of just how rare these Stormer Red Devils really were. Although just how successful and how many of these bikes were actually made, I just haven't a clue, but that's of course the beauty about my classic dirt bike TV channel, because not only are my viewers and subscribers learning about rare and exotic dirt bikes from our past, I'm also discovering these old race bikes that I otherwise wouldn't have been aware of if it wasn't for taking the time to photograph and film these lovely vintage racers. Well, I do hope you enjoyed that quite brief look around Terry Pickering's 1978 AJS Stormer 250 Red Devil. Not a very well-known machine, of course, even here in the UK, but nevertheless another nice looking bike from the AJS motocross racing stable. Okay, that's just about it for now. I'm going to pack up my camera equipment and we're going to head down to Kendal to the Westmoreland Motor Club's 2-day CCM extravaganza. So maybe if you're heading to that particular event, we may cross paths at that 2-day event. So just come up and say hello if you see me at that event. But until then, everybody of course continue to be safe and well, and we'll all get together to show you all the action and the bikes from that 2-day CCM event when we all return to your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.